Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister has told the BBC that Boris Johnson makes her cross after he launched a scathing attack on her Chequers plan for leaving the European Union at the Conservative Party conference. Addressing a crowd of more than 1,000 people, the former Foreign Secretary said Theresa May's strategy was not what people had voted for, calling it dangerous and a political humiliation. But the Prime Minister hit back, saying her plan was the only one that guaranteed Northern Ireland would remain part of the UK, and she dismissed Boris Johnson, saying he put on a good show, but she was concentrating on what mattered to people's lives. From Birmingham, here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg. Her report contains some flashing images.
Hi, folks. Hi.
Deep breath. Was he ready? Was the party ready? This conference hadn't seen anything like this.
Is this a leadership bit, Mr. Johnson? Are you really trying to do it?
Brexiteer-in-chief. Now the Prime Minister's critic-in-chief.
What is he up to, your son, then?
Honestly, I think he is doing a truly useful and important thing here today.
Boris is the one that they do want to hear, and they want to hear that vision directly from him.
Wondering how big a crowd he'd find.
Boris Johnson.
Discovering more than 1,000, many who hate Theresa May's so-called Chequers compromise tool.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Sit down. Come on. What the Chequers proposals show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might and network of influences around the world, for all its venerable parliamentary history, was unable, ultimately, to take back control. Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now, and fix it later. Get out properly, and, you know, that is a total fantasy. If we bottle Brexit now, believe me, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive. And there is time. This is the moment to chuck Chequers.
The stage was his, not just on Brexit, his spotlight alone. Except, of course, Boris Johnson is not the leader, not the Prime Minister. Today, at least, she's competing in his shadow.
Did you watch Boris Johnson's speech this afternoon?
No, this afternoon I've been meeting activists, I've been talking to people about the conference, and I've been seeing a party that is in really good heart.
Well, people were certainly in good heart in the Boris Johnson speech. More than 1,000 people cheered him for demanding that you drop your Chequers compromise plan. He said it's not democracy if you continue.
Well, first of all, there's one thing we all know about Boris is that he'll put on a good show. But what we've been doing here at conference, of course, and I think what matters to people out there, is what the government does and what we focus on in terms of their day-to-day lives and what really matters to them.
This is the man whom, until very recently, you trusted to be your Foreign Secretary. Do you want to just directly stand up to him?
Well, first of all, of course, Boris, when he was Foreign Secretary, signed up to the Chequers plan, and then, a few days later, resigned from the cabinet.
But he's directly challenging your authority, Prime Minister. Now, Boris Johnson has come here today and trampled all over that. You must be cross. How can you put up with it?
Well, there are one or two things that Boris said that I am cross about. He wanted to tear up our guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. You know, we are all, he and I, all members here are members of the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's because we believe in the union of the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is part of that union. And we have a guarantee for the people of Northern Ireland, and we are upholding that. Our Chequers plan does that. It's the only plan on the table at the moment that does.
He left almost as quickly as he arrived. But Theresa May knows that Boris Johnson is not just a loudmouth Brexiteer, but her rival, who will not simply be here today and gone tomorrow.
And Sophie, the crux of the problem is really simple. There are plenty of people here, particularly those in government, who frankly wish that Boris Johnson would just go away. They think he's overplayed his hand. They think he's like that irritating child who keeps asking for something he knows that he isn't going to get. For them, this is all about his leadership ambitions, and frankly, they wish he had never stepped foot here in the Birmingham Conference Centre today. The problem is, though, love him or loathe him, Boris Johnson is difficult to ignore. Frankly, today, his appearance on the stage was the first time this conference has really come to life. He may well not be the leader. He may well drive some Conservatives and many members of the public round the twist. But as far as this conference this year is concerned, so far, he's the star.
Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg in Birmingham. Thank you.
Welcome to Birmingham, where Theresa May says she wasn't watching Boris Johnson's speech, but hundreds of activists were. Some 1,500 crowded into a hall at the Conservative Conference Fringe to hear the former Foreign Secretary denounce Mrs May's Chequers plan as an outrage, with loud applause from the audience as he declared, "If we bottle Brexit now, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive." Our political editor Gary Gibbon reports, and a warning, there is flash photography.
Whoa! Stop!
A manic scrum for the great performer. But this is a divided Conservative Party. Not everyone is queuing to grab a seat.
Are you going to make time in the diary to go and see Boris Johnson?
No, I'm not. No, why would I do that? Well, because I've sort of heard it all before. I'm waiting for some details. Not flowery language and sort of classical references.
For years, leaderships have dreaded the day Boris Johnson visits conference and planned distractions.
There would always, every year, be a conversation about, can we move some announcements up? You know, one year, should the Chancellor's speech be moved to the same day to steal the headlines? And nothing much has changed. And I say that was when Boris was part of the team.
They put out an immigration policy announcement to draw attention away from him. But all the big queues were still at Boris Johnson's end of the conference centre.
It's a bit more civilised than the Harrods Sale, I think.
What made you queue so early for this?
He's always interesting, he's always good value, he's always funny.
Would he make a good leader, a good Prime Minister?
In my view, actually, no.
You're sloping off before Theresa May, but you'll queue early for Boris Johnson.
Absolutely.
I just can't understand how we need a leader at the moment who believes in Brexit. Half the cabinet don't believe in Brexit.
Could he still pull a full house? Newspapers were pre-briefed. Boris Johnson wasn't just attacking Theresa May's approach on Brexit, but would lay out a policy stall beyond that.
The public line is always, we're not after Theresa May. This is just about getting her to change policy.
Boris is a fantastic advocate for a free society and a great Brexit, and I'm here today because I want to hear him talk about that.
Ditto.
He attacked Theresa May's ending of stop and search, Philip Hammond's call for higher taxes to pay for the NHS, and Michael Gove's message to Brexiteers to back Chequers and negotiate something better later.
Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now and fix it later. Get out properly in a year or two. That is a total fantasy. That is a total fantasy. This is the moment to chuck Chequers. And I hope you will join me in urging our friends in government to deliver what the people voted for. To back Theresa May in the best way possible by softly and quietly and sensibly supporting her original plan.
Theresa May's allies thought it wasn't quiet, sensible, or backing her.
He speaks for the grassroots of the Conservative Party, and not just a minority. We are talking the overwhelming grassroots of this party, and let's hope that Mrs May is taking note.
If she doesn't?
In my view, she has to go.
Yeah, I'm for Theresa May, not Boris Johnson.
But you came here?
I came here because I was interested. I wanted to see what he had to say, but yeah.
Speaking to the BBC, the Prime Minister showed her irritation.
Well, there are one or two things that Boris said that I am cross about. He wanted to tear up our guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom.
Less of a crush for the Home Secretary in the main conference hall. The decoy announcement that didn't quite work was substantial. confirming the government wants to stop mass migration of lower-paid workers from the EU.
A skills-based, single system that is opened up to talent from across the world. A system that doesn't discriminate between any one region or any one country. A system based on merit.
The government also said it wouldn't throw in piles of work visas when it was trying to sweeten future trade deals with countries like India. That got a slapdown from the CBI.
This feels, I have to say, to businesses today like something of a wrong turning. By dismissing the value of lower skilled workers to the UK, it ignores the needs of many of our businesses, and we really hope this is not the final word.
There'll be more on immigration when the Prime Minister closes the conference with her speech tomorrow, hoping she can pull back any support Boris Johnson pulled over with his raucous day trip.
Well, Gary Gibbon joins us live now, away from the clatter of this conference. What's actually happening on the ground in Brussels with negotiations?
Getting a feeling, talking to people around here and elsewhere, that there is what I think in lunar terms is called a docking procedure going on. There has been movement on the British side. There was originally a plan to have a deadline on us staying in something that looked and smelled and walked a lot like the customs union. It looks as though the government is ready to lose that deadline, to admit that until such time as the EU sign up to what replaces it, there can't be a replacement. On the EU side, maybe some acceptance of the idea that we can have single market rules, as it were, the common rule book, as it is called in the government's plans, for goods without having services in there. But they want stronger commitments from the government on how we're not going to diverge in the way we run our economy from the rest of Europe. So you can see some sort of coming together there potentially. And then on Northern Ireland, where there's been a lot of noise here, the DUP MPs have been traipsing around here all day. Some movement there as well. The EU wants more checks on animals that go east-west, and the government's saying, no, can we just keep the number low? But if they're just talking about checks on animals going east-west, well, you can see that there is scope for agreement there if they can just agree a number in the middle, something like that. Also some dispute about whether goods in Northern Ireland that have come from Britain should be checked in the shop in Belfast, as it were, rather than in Dublin when it's crossed. Disputes over that sort of thing. You can see some coming together, but one thing I can tell you, though, is there's no way after today here that what emerges, if the Prime Minister gets a deal, will be called the Chequers deal. I think they'll think of something much more sellable to this party, maybe call it the EU-UK Free Trade Agreement.
What about the one that's called Boris Johnson? I mean, in, out, up, down?
Well, Peter and Theresa May are hoping, praying, thinking, genuinely, I think, that he may have overplayed his hand here and in recent days and weeks, that his share price is down a bit. But the most interesting thing, I think, that came out of that meeting was looking at a list, it was accidentally left around, of how many MPs were due to turn up. Because, of course, this all comes back down to a vote in the House of Commons if the Prime Minister gets a deal. There were 20 or so MPs' names down there. I'm not sure they were all in there. One of them I spoke to who was in there wasn't sure he was going to vote against Chequers. You kind of assume someone who went all the way, traipsed all the way over there and was part of the fanatical rally might be. And I think the government might extract a little bit of hope from that moment.
Gary Gibbon. Now, unfortunately, we were hoping to have an interview with the Prime Minister, as is traditional at party conferences over the last 3 decades. Sadly, that was not to be this week. But if you're watching, Prime Minister, we'd still love to talk to you. There'll always be a chair for you on Channel 4 News. Well, now, I've been talking to the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, and we'll be hearing what he has to say about education issues in a moment. But I began with Brexit and Boris Johnson, asking if it was time to chuck Chequers.
Chequers, the proposal put together at Chequers, the white paper, is the proposal that's on the table. There is no counter-proposal from the European Union institutions. And no one's come forward with any credible way of making other proposals work. It's a balanced proposal. It's practical. It's pragmatic. It's a good basis to work from, and we need to get on with those discussions with the European Union and get the deal done.
So you're not one of the cabinet members favouring a Canada-style deal?
I'm favouring the British government policy, which is the proposal put together at Chequers, which, as I say, it's a balanced approach. It means that we can, have frictionless trade across borders, but we will control free movement. It means not having, indefinite large amounts of money going to the EU. So it delivers on the referendum in a good way.
Now, I mean, love him or hate him, Boris Johnson has been here today. Hundreds of people have been to see him, queuing outside, 1,500 altogether.
Well, I don't have a view on something I didn't see.
No,
It's an
you've
open.
got someone you have seen more than you perhaps want to.
It's at a party conference. We have many fringe events and many interesting discussions, and people go and take
But
part in
I'm
all
asking
sorts of
about
different
Boris
things.
Johnson.
Please do.
1,500 people turn out at a Conservative Party conference to listen to somebody who's absolutely at variance with your policies.
Well, look, I mean, there are a lot of people here at this conference. You'll see more in the main hall, clearly.
That's more than in your speech.
No, that's more than in my speech, but you'll see more tomorrow. Look, the mood in this conference, the mood when you talk to delegates, is people want to get on with doing these negotiations. The Chequers proposal is a good basis to work from. Of course, you've got to have those discussions, but there's also many other things that the government is doing, and we need to be focusing on them. So I've been focusing, and what I've been saying about education and skills and seizing the opportunities for a global Britain and a post-Brexit world, making sure we make the technological change going on in the world work for us, not against us. These are the important things as well that we need to be talking about.
But that's not what people are talking about. And the fact is, this has been a shop window.
I keep
for one
hearing
of the most divided
people
periods
talking
that
about it.
Conservatives have ever experienced in history.
Well, you may and probably are talking to different people, perhaps, from the people I'm talking to, but I do hear people talking about all those things, the challenges we face, the opportunities we face, and how, we need the Conservative government to be delivering on these things, and we can't risk having the Labour government undoing all the progress that's been made.
I've been in the hall and out of the hall. In the hall, there's been loyalty to the government, there's been very little criticism at all. Out of the hall, the place is awash with it.
You've always heard a range of opinions at a party conference. That's kind of partly what it's for, to let people come together and discuss issues. But also, we know there's a really important job to be done in a matter of months and weeks to make sure that we get the best Brexit deal for Britain. People know that is incredibly important. The Prime Minister is doing a fantastic job, and we all need to get behind that and make sure it really is the best deal that can be done.
My heart is torn.
Well, now joining me are the journalist Rachel Johnson, a Johnson but not a Leaver, and the columnist Matthew Paris, and also by Ian Martin. Matthew, last hurrah or the coming man?
It did have a little bit of a sort of comeback tour feeling about it, all the old jokes, all the old tricks. It was a little bit ragged as a speech. The hall loved it because the hall was composed almost exclusively of people who love Boris. It did not bomb as a speech, but nor would I call it a great barnstorming performance. I just didn't have the impression that he actually has a plan or a strategy. He just loves the audience and the applause.
Well, I mean, naturally you love Boris, but what's your reading as a journalist of what you beheld today?
I thought that he had I think the conference was waiting for Boris to put his tank squarely on Theresa May's lawn. And he didn't, but he left them sort of within vision of Downing Street, so she could look through the net curtains of her new immigration policy and see Boris's tank. And this will be her guide, this will guide her as she goes forward into the October summit, where she has to put Chequers to the 27, and if that doesn't fly, I think she's in serious trouble.
Are the tanks on the lawn or have the tracks begun to come off?
I think the tracks have begun to come off, actually. I thought there was a real faded grandeur about it. I mean, it was a pretty well-constructed speech, very impressively delivered, as you would anticipate. But I think that part of the problem for him is now that he's been in the public eye so long. He's breaking that rule that Gordon Brown used to have, which is the 7-year rule. There's only about 7 years that the public will take being told that you're the person, that you're the coming person for. And Boris has now been really massively famous since about 2004, 2005. So that's a problem for him. And also just that what's coming up next is complex. It's going to involve some compromises. British politics is going to be very difficult in the next 7 or 8 weeks. And there wasn't, what I detect as a Leaver, as a moderate Leaver, there wasn't a clear plan, for example, on the Northern Ireland border, not one that I could detect anyway.
You've just said the explosive word, plan. Did you see a plan, or do you know a plan?
I think Boris's plan, and gosh, I hate having to talk about Boris rather than Brexit as a
It's
whole.
inevitable as a Johnson
On
journalist.
Today of all days, is that the Irish border is not the obstacle that the EU is making it out to be, and the tail is wagging the dog. And if we can just forget about that problem, and some magical thinking and some technological solutions will solve it. And we go back to Phil Hammond's interview earlier in the week, where he mimicked the style, which is that, when push comes to shove, we will come up with a solution. That's the plan.
I don't think there's a plan, and I think that life is too short to deconstruct Boris Johnson's mental processes. I don't think there's even in his own head.
A lifetime is not long enough.
A plan. But were he to have a plan, he should take into account this conference with Conservative representatives, on the whole loyal folk. There's beginning to be a bit of a feeling of the wagons circling around Theresa May to protect her. They don't like the way she was treated in Salzburg by Donald Tusk. They don't like the way Boris has been shin-kicking. They didn't think it was funny, him running through the fields of what weren't wheat anyway. There's quite a protective feeling towards her, and I would have directed the speech.
Matthew,
yes.
I've not usually risen to correct you, because as you know, I'm a huge fan of yours. But the fields of wheat, Boris has been besieged by paparazzi for several weeks. The field of wheat.
But it was bonkers.
It's where he runs. So I'm sorry, it was not a deliberate
in those
trolling.
pants.
You've seen his. I'm not. I refuse. Just please.
But is the party, let's be serious, I mean, is the party, and the wagons may be circled round, as you put it, but in those Western movies, wagons catch fire, arrows come pouring in.
Yes.
Is there a danger the party may blow up?
No, not at the moment. It may later on. She's going to get through this conference actually stronger than she left it. There'll be huge support waiting for her in her speech tomorrow. She'll be fine tomorrow. Her problems are with the world. They are not with the Conservative Party.
He said later on.
Later on is pretty soon, because I think Matthew's absolutely right, but I would regard this as a holding operation. And really, things start to get very, very interesting when Theresa May has spoken tomorrow and everyone then heads back to London. And you then go into a 6, 7, 8 week period in which is going to be unlike anything I think any of us have experienced in British politics. The closest comparison would arguably be May 1940.
Can she carry the party through a deal?
I think that what is happening is that the Cabinet is giving her the time at this conference and the dignity, and is then expecting some moves away from Chequers, probably allowing her to call whatever she comes up with Chequers based, but not actually what she announced at Chequers. So they're anticipating some kind of shift in the next few days and weeks.
Meantime, no grain of policy. I mean, normally you have a jam-packed conference full of policies all over the place. Nothing.
Tips for waiters?
Tips for waiters is one. I could have learnt by heart a list of small announcements, but the Conservative Party knows that small announcements just won't cut it. No one wants to think about anything but Brexit, and there's just no point in trying to showcase anything short of cutting income tax completely or something like that.
I think there are two conferences here. There's the conference on the surface, which is all about leadership and the stuff we've been talking about. Underneath the surface, actually, I think the Tories should take quite a bit of heart. It's busier in terms of activists and fringe meetings than I've seen it in many a year. So something is happening. They were spooked by Corbyn's success last week at Labour conference, and they know that they have a fight on their hands.
Ian Martin, Rachel Johnson, Matthew Parris. Thank you all three.
Where in the space of 24 hours, members will have heard two speeches that could decide the party's future and plausibly the country's too. The stage here is now set for the Prime Minister's speech tomorrow morning. Today, though, the spotlight was on Boris Johnson. Just where he likes it, his critics might say. Certainly those among the 1,000-plus audience who queued for more than 3 hours to hear him rubbish Mrs May's Chequers plan for Brexit were probably not disappointed. It cheated the electorate, he said. It was a constitutional outrage. But words are easy, actions much harder to calibrate. So will he launch a bid for the crown, and if so, when?
Nobody really knows where Boris Johnson is heading right now, but normally it's into the limelight.
Just a leadership bid, Mr. Johnson.
This morning, with dozens of cameras all told of his timings, would this be the moment to picture his push to be Prime Minister?
Just a leadership bid.
Whatever the answer, he's already leading the conversation.
What will we hear from you today?
All too soon you'll hear.
And whether expecting to love or loathe what he said, some queued for 3 hours just to hear him.
Everybody loves him and he has the capacity to win votes more than any politician, and I think the whole queue, if you ask the same question, will agree.
Hands up, who thinks Boris Johnson would be a good Prime Minister? No?
Even he wasn't sure what to make of the crowd, but with his vision for Brexit in his hand, he made a run for the top job.
If we cheat the electorate, and Chequers is a cheat, we will escalate that sense of mistrust.
There was an attack on Jeremy Corbyn, a defence of Conservative values, but with enough MPs filling the front rows to defeat the Prime Minister, it was on her Chequers plan that he'd penned his real poison.
This is not democracy. That is not what we voted for. It is a constitutional outrage. It's not taking back control, it's forfeiting control. And by the way, they know it. This is the moment to chuck Chequers.
Some in the crowd echoed his cry. But most have already made up their mind about Boris Johnson, and few here had changed it.
Very impressive. So yes, I think it was. We're very pleased to be there.
A leader in waiting?
Yes, definitely.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Boris, go home. There's lots of us in here who don't want to see him as leader.
You know your son. This is a bit of a leadership bid, isn't it?
I completely disagree that it's a leadership bid. This is actually to do with him putting forward a really reasoned objection to the Chequers deal.
But there's no doubt his speech will rival Theresa May's tomorrow. And whether or not he wants to snatch the leadership, well, he's already stolen the spotlight. Paul Brand, News at 10, Birmingham.
The Prime Minister made clear again to Boris Johnson, and everyone else for that matter, that there would be no vacancy at number 10 anytime soon. Not now, not next week, and not after Brexit either. After Mr Johnson's speech, she told Robert Peston about her frustration at his plans to put talks on Northern Ireland's border with the Republic on hold.
How lovely to see you. How are you?
The Prime Minister on the eve of perhaps the most important speech of her life.
Oh, busy day, as ever.
Because she has to sell her controversial Brexit plan to her sceptical members and see off the challenge to her authority from her former Foreign Secretary.
Boris Johnson, not a great secret, is devoting his life to making your life as difficult as possible. What was it that you saw in him when you made him Foreign Secretary?
Well, I thought Boris would be a good Foreign Secretary. And he was a good Foreign Secretary.
So what does she think of Johnson's call for talks to decide how to keep open the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic to be shunted till after we leave the EU next March?
The equivalent of saying we want a no-deal Brexit.
And this is what I find frustrating about what Boris has said, is that you're talking about this backstop in this way. The backstop is a guarantee for the people of Northern Ireland. All of us here, all members of the party and members of the Conservative and Unionist Party, we believe in the union of the United Kingdom, and I think that guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland is important.
So what
for
he
us.
said was really unhelpful?
What he appeared to be saying was that he wanted to tear up something which was effectively a guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland.
Now, her big announcement today was a framework for controlling immigration after Brexit.
Will there be a cap on the number of skilled people who are allowed into the country?
Well, what it does is takes a different approach to our migration by saying, actually, it won't be about where somebody comes from, it will be about the contribution they can make to our economy.
And numbers will come down, will they, to those tens of thousands that you promised?
Well, we're still committed to those sustainable levels, as we promised in our manifesto.
Committed to tens of thousands?
Yes, that was in our manifesto.
Yeah. Now, Brexit is dominating all politics. What, apart from getting us out of the European Union, would you like to be your legacy as Prime Minister?
I really worry about a situation where many young people feel they're never going to be able to own their own home. So building more homes is important.
Is that
for
the
us.
single biggest thing you'd like to achieve?
There's several things we need to achieve,
Right.
Robert. Our modern industrial strategy, setting the economy of the future, saying where will the jobs be in the future, and how can we ensure the UK is at the leading edge of new development.
I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, many of your colleagues think that you'll be perfectly happy to go after March the 29th next year. They're wrong, aren't they?
I've always been very clear that there is a domestic agenda. We will carry on that domestic agenda, carry on delivering on the things that I believe are what make a real difference to people's lives day to day. This is about post-Brexit Britain. It's about a post-Brexit Britain that provides opportunity for all its people.
So, if Boris Johnson wants to sit in her seat, she's not giving it up without a fight. Robert Veston, News at 10.
And joining me now is the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, with plenty to talk about. Can I just start? You've caused quite a lot of offence over the past few days with your comments comparing the European Union to the Soviet Union. You've been asked to apologise today, will you?
Well, I think anyone who actually heard what I said knows that I didn't say the EU is like the Soviet Union. What I did say is if the attitude of the EU to a member of the club who wants to leave is that they should be punished for doing so, then that is not consistent with European values. And that's what I was arguing passionately for, a partnership between the UK and continental Europe as being the right way forward.
You and I grew up with the Soviet Union. We know what it was really like. Can you see why some people are offended by that comparison? And would, given the difficulty of our circumstances at the moment, wouldn't an apology be helpful?
Well, I didn't make that comparison. That's my point. What I actually argued passionately for was that a partnership between Britain and continental Europe has given us peace and prosperity, the like of which we have never seen before in European history, and that's what I want to continue. But that means showing respect to someone who wants to leave the legal structures of the EU, but actually wants to remain friends, and that's what we want.
Let's just deal with Boris Johnson. Was it a leadership bid? Is he going to launch one? Does he have the numbers? What would you say to him tonight?
Well, I think, frankly, the country are far more interested in what Theresa May says tomorrow than what Boris Johnson said today. But I really make two comments. First of all, this isn't a time to have a huge argument about which shade of Brexit we end up with. That's an important debate to have. But right now, the European Union aren't actually really negotiating with us about any shade of Brexit. And what we need is to start a proper negotiation. And Theresa May has put some very serious proposals on the table, thought through. They deal with the issues of the Northern Irish border. They give us frictionless trade. And what we need is to sit down and have a proper negotiation.
Can I just jump in there a moment and say, with the greatest respect, that's an extraordinary admission for the Foreign Secretary to be making just at the 11th hour before we're supposed to leave, that they're basically not negotiating with us at all.
Well, they are negotiating with all sorts of details about the withdrawal agreement, but what we've always said is that we need to also agree what our future relationship is going to look like. And the Prime Minister was very clear after Salzburg, we've reached an impasse. And we need to sit down because we want to have what we call a deep and special partnership with the EU. But it does take two to tango.
But you're not going to get a deal from them as it looks today. I think you would readily acknowledge that. And even if you did, you're not necessarily going to get it through Parliament. That looks rather unlikely. I think a lot of people watching are going to say, well, when are you and the Prime Minister going to come clean and tell us what your real plan is? Because the plan you've got doesn't seem to be working.
All I would say is, Tom, don't underestimate Theresa May. And I would say that to our European friends as well. Don't underestimate our Prime Minister. She is courteous, polite, extremely resilient, and she will only sign a deal that is consistent with the letter and spirit of what we voted for in that referendum.
Very briefly, if it looks like no deal, would you accept the country probably needs another referendum before it makes that momentous move?
I think that would be a terrible mistake. If we had a second referendum, people would say, what about a third referendum or a fourth referendum? No, what we have to do, we're a democracy, one of the oldest democracies in Europe. We have to deliver what the people voted for. But what they want is, yes, to leave the EU, but to have friendly relationships with our neighbours, and that's what we're fighting hard for.
OK, well, thank you for joining us. Critical few months. Let's see how it turns out. And Robert is, of course, with me here to try and make sense of all this. Boris Johnson, is he going to stand for the leadership anytime soon, in your view?
Well, let's be absolutely clear. Talking to the Prime Minister this afternoon, I am absolutely certain she is going to have to be dragged out of Downing Street. She feels, even after she's delivered Brexit, there are other things she wants to achieve. I've talked to members of her cabinet. They know that the moment that she goes, they'll have to foment a crisis of some sort. So
Boris Johnson wants to be leader. The man you just interviewed,
Jeremy
Hunt,
Hunt.
wants to be leader. I have to tell you, half the cabinet want to be leader, but there's no vacancy.
OK. Let's move on. We effectively had Jeremy Hunt just admitting there the European Union isn't bothering to negotiate with us. Is the Chequers plan effectively, dead in the water? Is she going to have to move on with it?
Saw Jacob Rees-Mogg this afternoon. He says no chance of him or maybe 30 or 40 colleagues voting for it. Labour Party very ambiguous about it. Talk to people in Brussels, as I do. They don't like most of it. I'll tell you one person who is not giving up on it.
I think I know the answer to this.
It is the Prime Minister.
OK.
She is going to give it one last push. Let's be clear, this has been the weirdest conference of my life because although it's generated a lot of noise, it's almost irrelevant to our future. What matters to our future are these extraordinarily important negotiations that she is going to have with other European leaders, and Dominic Raab is going to have with his counterparties in Brussels in the next few days. We will witness history. We haven't seen it here.
OK, that's a good assessment. Thank you very much indeed, Robert.
Can you topple a major policy without toppling the leader behind it? Or do you wait for the policy to topple so the leader falls swiftly after? Don't believe for a moment that question's hypothetical. It's the realpolitik that's now tying this Conservative conference in knots. Boris Johnson arrived here today 3 hours ahead of his scheduled fringe appearance and hid from sight. By the time he appeared, a media scrum had been manipulated to make his moment unmissable. Delegates were queuing for him round the block. They waited hours, and his speech, when it came, accused his Prime Minister of a plan, Chequers, that was treacherous and unstable, humiliating and a cheat. Many here think they know what Boris Johnson wants. The big question is, do the rest of Theresa May's colleagues now want it too? Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Waiting in the wings with time for a light exchange. The original Brexit band lined up in the front row as their tribune stepped into the limelight to stamp his mark on the Tory conference.
Chuck Chequers.
The speech ranged way beyond Brexit as the ever-ambitious Boris Johnson set out his stall.
So an ecstatic reception for Boris Johnson in a packed hall. This suggests that the Boris Johnson story is far from over. And if the people here get a say, he may well make it to number 10.
Only if there's a vacancy. At the moment, Brexiteers do not have the numbers to unseat Theresa May. And one person who knows Boris Johnson well says the leadership is far from his mind.
And I think that Boris, actually they tend to call him Boris nowadays, is out of here, is here out of principle. I mean, this is a principled speech he's going to make, and it's about a speech saying we cannot afford to let Chequers happen.
And should we see this as his sort of pitch to the nation? Well, what about seeing it as him lining up to be Prime Minister?
I just don't see that. I mean, I see this as a career-ending move. You know, I know what the Tories are like. These are people who are brought up. Loyalty is in their mother's milk. You know, oh, he wasn't loyal. He wasn't loyal. Well, sometimes you have to say, is it more important to be loyal to the country than the party?
Can you change the policy without changing the leader?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is never about leadership, and I'm going to say this to you now, Nick. I find it really dull, quite regressive, that everything comes down to questions about our party leader. Theresa May is our Prime Minister. She's also the leader of the Conservative Party, and she has everybody's support. And there's a reason for that. That's because her success on Brexit would obviously lead to the success of us, our country, and also our party when we deliver the type of Brexit that we promised to deliver for the British public.
Theresa May was unamused.
There are one or two things that Boris said that I am cross about. He wanted to tear up our guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom.
The Prime Minister's supporters made light of the speech.
So, James Cleverly, you used to work with Boris Johnson. What did you think of him rolling into town today?
I missed the speech. Unfortunately. I've worked with Boris a lot. I've worked for him for 10 years. I love him to bits, but I and a lot of other colleagues are focused on delivering the agenda that the Prime Minister set out, both on Brexit, but on all those other really important stuff: housing, jobs, the economy, all that kind of good stuff. That's what we're focusing on.
But he is directly challenging the Prime Minister, Chuck Chequers.
Well, we know that that's what he wants, because he's told us a number of times. We get it, we've heard that, but I happen to not agree. I think we've got to do the best that we can do to deliver a deal for the British people and then get on with what really matters.
Party conferences are all about people sharing ideas. That's great for people to come and have discussions about ideas other than Brexit. But I think what people perhaps feel uncomfortable about is if it seemed to be actually all about Boris's leadership ambitions, and I don't think that's what people want to see. People don't want to see the Prime Minister being undermined at such a crucial stage of our negotiations, and I think that's what people will find disappointing.
Boris Johnson remains a potent force with limits. While his wing cannot overthrow the Prime Minister, they may be able to force her hand over Brexit. Some cabinet ministers privately agree that the UK should agree a looser free trade deal with the EU.
I've no doubt, I mean, delivering Brexit is challenging, it's difficult, we know all of that, but I'm sure she's listening, I'm sure she's looking at many of the other plans and ideas that have been put forward. And that work has been taking place in governments, and now I think it's about time that was elevated and brought to the table and actually looked at in that holistic way.
A scrum in Birmingham, but a real battle is underway to shape Brexit. Boris Johnson is striking now to ensure his side prevails.
That was Nick Watt, and just before we came on air I talked to Jacob Rees-Mogg, head of the ERG group of Brexiteers, and I asked him if he accepted that Boris Johnson had made sure today had been all about Boris Johnson.
He is using the power of his personality to promote a proper Brexit, a clean Brexit, and that's the right thing for him to be doing.
It was an unedifying spectacle, wasn't it? If you were the Prime Minister and you saw queues of people standing there for over 2 hours to hear your former Foreign Secretary trashing your leadership in the hall of your conference, it was deeply unedifying.
I don't think it was unedifying. It showed where the bulk of the Conservative Party is. The Conservative Party wants a clean Brexit. And it's very important that the Prime Minister knows what the mood of the country, the Conservative Party, and indeed of MPs is, that sometimes Prime Ministers can be very protected and cut off from what public opinion is saying, and that may be part of the problem with Chequers, because the Chequers proposal is not Brexit. And you see from that attendance, that enthusiasm, that the Conservative Party at its conference wants a clean Brexit. That is the overwhelming message. And that's not unedifying, that's actually democracy in action. It's very encouraging.
This was not about the customs union today. This was about character. This was about somebody who said she risked prosecution, who said her plan was dangerous, unstable, humiliating, and an outrage. Now, there are ways of doing that, and one way is not to sign up to the deal, to sign up to the Chequers agreement first, and then leave government, and then come back right in the middle of a conference and steal her show. Surely you don't condone that behaviour.
Not only do I condone it, I fully support it. I think the Chequers proposal is dreadful. I think it is not Brexit, and it's very hard to see how it could work without us being the vassal state, which is the outcome that all of us have wanted to avoid. So Chequers is a really rotten proposal, and Boris Johnson is saying that, and he's quite right to say that.
Do you fully support it? Do you fully support him? Does he have your backing?
It depends what you mean. I admire Boris Johnson. I think he's a very capable person.
There isn't room for 2 Prime Ministers here, and he is trying to be the next one.
There's one Prime Minister, and I'm supporting Theresa May as Prime Minister, but I'm not supporting Chequers. Chequers will let Jeremy Corbyn in.
She is Chequers. I'm sorry to interrupt, but she is Chequers. The Prime Minister is Chequers, and Chequers is the Prime Minister. And you know very well that if Chequers goes, she goes too, and he's trying to get rid of both. Not just the plan, both.
I don't think that follows. The Prime Minister set out a very clear plan at Lancaster House and in the Conservative Party manifesto, which is very different from Chequers. The Prime Minister's position is said by her own team to have evolved, and the issue is, will it evolve back again?
There is Boris Johnson, who signs up to the Chequers deal and then resigns because he wants something more. He couldn't even decide which Telegraph column he was originally going to publish. He wasn't a fan of Brexit to begin with.
I think it's unfair to say Boris signed up to Chequers. He was there, he was at the meeting.
He signed up to it.
No, I don't think that's the right way of saying it. Neither he nor David Davis signed up to it. They could not accept constriction of collective responsibility in supporting Chequers. They left the government because they didn't.
He didn't even resign until David Davis stepped down.
He took time to resign. That's perfectly reasonable. He had resigned within 48 hours of Chequers. I think that really is splitting hairs.
It was her Brexit secretary, wasn't it, Dominic Raab, who said, if I told you 3 years ago, you know the quote, we were going to end free movement, stop the vast annual budget contributions, leave the single market, get out the customs union, blah, 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 you'd have bitten my arm off. Now, that's the truth. For most people, this is what they imagined a Brexit could be. Why does it have to be something that now brings down the government?
I tend not to be a great one for biting people's arms, but leaving that to one side...
Biting people's arms off?
Yes, I'm certainly not going to bite them off.
Right.
I'm not a cannibal. But leaving that to one side, the issue here is that actually Chequers leaves us within the single market, leaves us as a rule taker, leaves us de facto subject to the European Court of Justice, and these weasel words on not having vast payments. How big are these payments going to be if we're signing up to the acquis communautaire for goods and agri-foods?
This is an
That
action.
question isn't even answered. And free movement. Do we really know what's happening with free movement?
Chucking Chequers could bring down this government. Are you prepared to back that?
No, it couldn't. You're ignoring the 2011 Fixed-Term Parliament Act.
Because I don't believe that counts. I think if Chequers goes, then Theresa May has to follow. I don't see how she can stay in the job when everyone has manifestly shown they have no confidence in her judgment.
They have no confidence in one particular policy.
In
they
her
have
judgment
confidence
that she
in
has
other
stuck
policies.
to.
But this policy has come from a policy that had widespread support. Even as far as the Mansion House speech, people like me were willing to compromise, willing to go along with it. And that then turned into Chequers, which is not properly leaving the European Union.
If it's a choice between Chequers or Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister, where would you go?
People offer all sorts of choices. People have said Chequers or Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I'm offering Chequers or Boris Johnson right now to you, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Where is your support?
Yeah, but it's a false choice. That I'm going to vote against Chequers if Chequers is presented to Parliament because it is not Brexit, it is not delivering on the referendum result, and it's not delivering on the Conservative Party manifesto. I think MPs, all politicians, have to maintain faith with the electorate, and Chequers, to my mind, does not do that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, joining us now is Claire Perry, the Energy Minister, in the Cabinet with the PM. Claire Perry, nice to see you. What did you make of Boris Johnson's antics today?
I guess in some ways, Emily, it felt quite the same, because every couple of years, Boris and the travelling caravan arrive at conference for a couple of hours and make a speech, and we all kind of, lots of excitement and lots of media interest, and then he goes off and we all go back to normal. But in some ways, it felt quite different, because this is a time of unprecedented national importance. We're negotiating the most complicated deal we've ever negotiated in peacetime. The thing that the country wants, that delegates here want, that my members want, is a government that's pulling together. And I think there was a bit of a sense of frustration today that, the ego was running rampant, and we had somebody who'd been Foreign Secretary for a couple of years, who's held one of the offices of state, who should know the importance of us working together, and for his own reasons he chose to do something a bit different.
Except the ego worked. He had queues round the block, he had a standing ovation, and he's got your Cabinet colleagues wondering if he might not be right. That's the truth, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure that's the view expressed by the vast majority of Cabinet colleagues. And there were a lot of people in that room, including some of my members, who went because who doesn't want to see the circus come to down? It's always going to be interesting. You want to be there when Boris said the speech.
That. Why is there such a movement now behind this little badge people are wearing?
Chequers.
Chequers. How did that become an inspiration?
Well, because it's a clever alliteration, and as a journalist, that's one of the skills that journalists have. It's often expressed by people who haven't actually sat down and read what Chequers is. Chequers is a trade agreement, a proposal for a trade agreement with the EU going forward that gives us the maximum economic benefit and delivers on the results of the referendum. So I find it mystifying, to be honest, having listened to the arguments on both sides, that there is such a strength of feeling. And I would bet that a lot of people wearing those badges don't really know what Chequers is, certainly haven't read it, and are using it as a sort of symbol of protest rather than actually a proper...
You touch on something though, Claire, when you talk about a strength of feeling, because one of the things that has been quite frustrating to watch perhaps is how timid Theresa May has been in her response. I mean, when she said today she was quite cross with something that Boris Johnson said because of Northern Ireland, I mean, I'm imagining here that if it had been you, you would have been livid.
Well,
you wouldn't
anger-
have been supporting that, and you wouldn't have been absent
and
from
that's
your
why
entire
I'm
conference.
not leading the negotiations. Anger is not a useful emotion in politics.
Passion
let's face
is,
it.
though.
Passion is, and when you see the Prime Minister standing up, she came back from Salzburg, she made another incredible speech in number 10 saying, we are doing this on behalf of the country. It's not about me, it's about the negotiations in the country, and we are ready to work with the
this
EU.
week? I mean, it feels like she's absent from her
She's
own
Emily,
conference.
she's given 36 interviews. I think there was an interesting little piece today with people saying she's not giving enough access. She's given 36 interviews. She's been at many, many of the events I've been to. She's also gone off and supported other colleagues at events. And she's doing the thing that people want, which is leading the country at a time of incredible national importance. This isn't a game, Emily. This is unbelievably important. And I suppose one of my slight frustrations, once again, is I think we've had enough of politicians who put ego over substance. So this time what we need is people who will deliver on the job.
Let me ask you very straight then, as I put to Jacob Rees-Mogg, does she have to go if Chequers goes, and does Chequers have to stay for her to stay?
Well, what she wants to deliver is the right Brexit for Britain, and she is committed to delivering that. And Chequers
Is that Chequers?
Well, Chequers is the proposal that delivers two things. It delivers on the results of the referendum, and it doesn't screw over almost 2 million UK citizens living in Northern Ireland.
Tell me, you and your cabinet colleagues are not starting to have deeply uncomfortable feelings about whether she can actually sit this one out.
I sat in Cabinet last Monday and we had the conversation with the Prime Minister, who said, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think this was the right deal for Britain. I'm tying myself, as we should all be, to getting the best Brexit deal for Britain. And I think Chequers is, first of all, we don't control the outcome because it's a negotiation, but do I think Chequers
It's about a leap of faith, though, isn't it? It's about your confidence in her judgment.
No, it's not about a leap of faith. It's about a proposal, which is what Chequers is, for a future trading relationship that delivers on the referendum, all the things we said, and doesn't screw up the economy on which our prosperity depends.
Looking ahead, what has the Prime Minister got to tell us tomorrow that will really fill these halls, bring inspiration, bring the standing ovation that she needs to?
Well, I think what she's going to tell us is she's going to tell us that she is completely committed to getting the best deal for the country in the Brexit negotiations, and she will work night and day to deliver it. And she is not a person who does that because of ego, she does it because of principle. And I think principle politicians are actually what the country rather admires, and the polls tend to suggest that. And what she's going to say is all these banners around the hall about the other things we're delivering on, protecting the NHS, delivering opportunity, making sure people have more money in their pockets, a series of announcements that will deliver those things too.
Claire Perry, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Well, Nick Watt is back, and he's been looking ahead at the PM speech tomorrow. What do you think she's going to say? What's her narrative, I guess?
Well, the Prime Minister will be announcing that fuel duty is going to be frozen for the 9th year in a row, and this in a sense is going back to her original message. She's the Prime Minister for the struggling classes, but on her big picture message she's going to say that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, its best days lie ahead. And this is designed to answer the criticism that everything's a bit gloomy with the way that she's handling Brexit. It's designed to unite her very, very divided party, but also she's trying to reach out to Labour voters not happy with Jeremy Corbyn. She says, using Jeremy Corbyn's language, that she leads a party not for the few, not even for the many. She leads a party for everyone.
And she's also got a little bit of trouble coming to her from the DUP in the shape of Arlene Foster.
That's right. This evening the Prime Minister met Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, and after that Arlene Foster tweeted. Normally it'd be great discussions with the Prime Minister. It was a tweet in capital letters, no border down the Irish Sea of any sort. And the reason why Arlene Foster has done that is that there are reports that we've confirmed that the government is looking at some sort of regulatory checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And talking to DUP sources, it sounds to me that they are hardening their red lines that really matters, because they're propping up Theresa May's government. A few months ago, they were saying to me, we need a cast-iron guarantee from Theresa May that she will not allow any of these checks. What they're now saying is we need a cast-iron, legally binding guarantee that under no circumstances ever in the future could this happen. The EU's getting that with its backstop. We'll have it too. Thanks very much, is what they're saying.
Sounds like a pincer movement on her then, from both sides.
All right, before we go back to Emily to take a look at some of the columns from tomorrow's papers, just a quick look at some of the front pages. The Financial Times Amazon raises minimum wage as critics prompt Bezos to listen. I think they're talking about their minimum wage, not the national minimum wage. Powerful, but not that powerful. The Telegraph, Cabinet demands May sets a date to quit. Pressure on PM as senior Tories insist it's now a matter of when, not if. And The Guardian, May appeals to decent patriots in effort to halt Johnson leadership bid. So Tory conference is there. Let's go back on that note to Emily at the Conservative Party conference.
Evan, thanks. As promised, we've got our guests here to look inside the papers. Daniel Finkelstein from The Times and Anna Mikhailova from The Telegraph are here to talk us through some of the comment pieces in the papers tomorrow. And we're going to start with yours, Danny. Your one's coming out tomorrow, and I'm going to bring up the headline, the quote. That second referendum may just happen. That's where you're at. And Danny's quote from this piece is, if the country isn't simply to reach the end of March 2019, still debating as we fall off the cliff, someone's going to have to move. That wasn't your quote. Let's bring up the Times one. It was an excellent one, but it's the next one. So the Times one is about the second referendum. Just talk us through what you think.
So basically, neither Jeremy Corbyn nor Theresa May want to support a second referendum. But I think in the end, they might end up finding that's the only position they can take. For Jeremy Corbyn, he can take his party into rejecting all the deals that Theresa May puts forward. But when he gets right close to the edge, I think some MPs won't want to go over it, and they will therefore need something that unites the party. And Theresa May, she would be faced with the choice between a general election, a second referendum, or going over the cliff.
Do you still think that here, though? Because I'm sort of, obviously you're lost in conference bubble here, but between sort of Canada plus and Chuck Chequers and Chequers and all the rest of it, it doesn't feel like anyone is talking about anything other than Brexit of some kind.
Of course, and I'm not saying anybody wants that solution, it's just that there's not a majority for anything. So I was just reflecting what happens if everyone thinks this problem will go away. In the end, there'll be a majority for something, she'll get a deal. I was just asking the question, well, what happens if it doesn't go away and if they don't get a majority?
It was your idea, wasn't it, this referendum?
Not exactly my idea, but I did support having a referendum. And the reason I did is because I thought that we were getting ourselves in the European Union into an incredibly serious relationship, and I thought it was right to ask people where they wanted to be. And the vindication of doing that was they didn't.
And something you point out in your piece, I think, is particularly interesting on the timing. So, logistically, if we do have a second referendum, when would it actually occur, and how much time do we need to feasibly get it together? And it would almost certainly involve delaying Article 50, extending Article 50, which I think at that point...
Do you see that happening now?
I don't really see how you can have a second referendum without that, but I do think that it will, of all the options available, that will make Brexiteers and a lot of the country quite angry.
I'm going to ask you to have a look at the Raphael Behr piece in The Guardian for us. This is again talking about the Tories. It says they lack all vision and can see nothing but Brexit. And then he says the Birmingham Symphony Hall is packed with people who campaigned for Brexit, are getting Brexit and look most unhappy about it. It's a little bit the question I put to Jacob Rees-Mogg or Dominic Raab's quote, which is why are you fighting this when it's happening?
Yes, well, I think the opposition to Chequers has been quite strong. That's still sort of palpable here. I do think that, Downing Street counters that by saying, and this is what Theresa May will say to us tomorrow, we are getting Brexit, we will get control of our borders, laws. I just think a lot of people say that is Brexit in name only, and she's not actually delivering what we really wanted, which is what people really wanted, which is proper opportunities to trade freely and to be much more separated from the EU, then she will effectively leave us.
I thought that Raphael Behr captured brilliantly a sort of suppressed fear at the conference. Normally you come to the conference and there is a bit of synthetic opposition to the other party. And the thing at this conference is they really do fear Labour.
They quite admire what he said, do they?
No, it's not because of that. It's that they genuinely think it would be a very left-wing government. And so that gives a sort of undercurrent of fear, which I don't think has often existed in Conservative conferences.
You mean they're always calling Labour communists, whatever they are, and this time they might be right.
For 40 years they've been doing that, and now it might be correct.
Let's look at Janet Daly in The Telegraph. I don't mind who starts. Maybe I'll start with you, Anna. This is her line about Boris Johnson specifically. His bittersweet Tory conference speech will be a comfort to many. And then it says she, as in The PM has abandoned the message that might once have united her exasperated party and the disheartened nation, and Boris knows that. Boris has sort of inflated here, hasn't he, to sort of take up all the oxygen and all the space?
Yes, absolutely, and he sort of got up and he interestingly devoted half his speech not even to Brexit but to setting out domestic policy effectively, ideas on the economy and providing a counter-argument to Labour and Labour's proposals for nationalisation that we saw last week. So this is very much a veiled leadership bid, I think, is how we all read it.
Danny, do you think it's still veiled?
Well, no, it wasn't that veiled. And the problem with Janet's argument, she's a great polemicist, but the truth is people aren't going to have, they're going to not unite the party, and it's not going to unite the nation by going back to the Lancaster House principles, particularly if Europe isn't willing to negotiate those principles. So I felt that she was making the case for her own view, but then saying that view will unite the party and the country, but it won't.
Though. I mean, does she move towards Boris or towards the EU?
My view is that she's going to have to negotiate with the EU because she's not negotiating with Boris Johnson. We're leaving the European Union, unfortunately not leaving him.
Thank you both very much indeed.